and good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Caldwell. I'm one of the manufacturing engineering managers here at MECC and leader of our site Veterans Employee Resource Group. I want to thank you all in the audience and people online for being here. Over the past week, the Twin Cities VERG has had some excellent events and speakers leading up to today's capstone event, and I'm honored to welcome you to today's Veterans Day Leadership Panel. I want to start by grounding us in why we celebrate Veterans Day. It goes back over 100 years as a celebration to the end of World War I. In the last year of the war in 1918, fighting ceased when an armistice took effect between the Allied nations and Germany, and it went into effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And for that reason, November 11th, 1918 is generally regarded as the end of the war to end all wars. Veterans Day continues to be observed on November 11th, regardless of what day of the week on which it falls. And the purpose of Veterans Day has expanded over the years. It is a day to honor Americans' veterans for their courage, patriotism, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for our freedoms. The significance of this day and the impact that veterans have touches all of us. Veterans, their families, and supporters have such a strong presence here at Medtronic and in our larger communities. As a small demonstration of that, I would like any veterans here in the audience to please stand. Stay standing. Any family members of veterans, please stand. Stay standing, please. Any supporters of our veterans, please stand. Okay. Thank you all. Yeah, please be seated. If you look to your left and right and see the presence of those of us online, I think it's quite clear how service members and their supporters comprise such a huge population within our organizations. The Veterans Day Moment of Silence is a 2-minute national observance that honors the sacrifice of veterans who have died in service. The Moment of Silence takes place at a specific time each year. I believe for this year it's 2:11 p.m. Eastern Time, but we're going to do our own small observance now. So if you would, please join me now for a brief moment of silence. Thank you all. Before I turn the event over to Dave, I would like to mention that after our panel, we'll be gathering in conference room Ashbillow just behind us to talk more about the VERG mission here at MECC. We will have some challenge points to pass out and refreshments as well, so please stick around for that. I would now like to welcome Dave Wagner, Vice President of Operations Innovations and our VERG Executive Sponsor.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you everyone who's here in person and those of you who are online or watching on video later. We appreciate your engagement with the Veterans Network. We're delighted to be here and delighted to have this panel to share some of their experiences both in uniform and as civilian leaders in business and understand the role that veterans can play. So I'm joined here by several distinguished guests. First of all is Ken Verhulst, our Senior Vice President for Global Manufacturing. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
Ken is an Army veteran. He will also tell you that it's 33 days until the Army-Navy game. And this is
Who's this?
I brought that along.
You brought that?
Yeah. Go Army, beat Navy. We have three Army panelists here. But anyway, welcome, Ken.
Thanks.
Appreciate specifically, Ken, the fact that you flew up on Sunday to be here with us in person. Yeah, we thought it would be a great opportunity for this group to meet you, so thank you. Chris McDaniel, our Senior Director for Manufacturing here at the MECC site. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Chris is also distinguished as our first Peter T. Collings Leadership Award winner. So in honor of Pete Collings, who helped stand up the Veterans Network at Medtronic, and Chris was our first recipient, so we're delighted to have you with us. Christy Einhorn, who's a marketing leader and Senior IVP Program Director and Chief of Staff in our neuroscience business, representing the Air Force. Welcome, Christy. And if you've been to any Veterans Network events, you'll know Jose Ayala. He's a compliance director in our business and the VERG co-chair. which is how you would know Jose, and representing U.S. Navy here today. So thanks, Jose. And we very consciously did not allow any Marine Corps representatives on stage today. So that was intentional, if you're wondering.
They're doing push-ups in the back.
So I want to get right into the questions to our panelists. And so I think for the audience to get to know you a little bit, can you share with us, each one of you, I'd like to hear the background, your background, and what motivated you to serve in the military, and how did that shape who you are today? Ken, we'll start with you.
Hey, good morning.
You gave me a bad microphone. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So I grew up in a small town in southwest Wisconsin. If I wasn't going to be a pro football player, I was probably going to be a pro wrestler or a rock and roll star. And my dad passed away when I was 13, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for school. And I also liked to play sports, and I started getting recruited, albeit by the Air Force Academy, to play football, only to blow my knee out senior year of high school. So I still had to figure out how I was going to pay for school, and I really liked being a leader on sports and such, and I got lucky. I got into West Point, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me from an education and experience standpoint. So it was a need that I had, coming from a big family, and I was the baby, and it wasn't a lot of money back then, but it also was something I really wanted to do that was special. I thought West Point was a special place for me.
I think that's a very common background for a lot of people joining the military, seeing it as a path of transition, right? Chris, how about you?
Yeah, so I grew up in the South, and I came from a pretty tough upbringing. I was a Native American kid, and I went through several foster homes, moving around Texas most of my life. And by the time I was 15, I was living on my own, and I started dating my high school sweetheart. And I dropped out of high school so I could work full time. She told me, I'm not marrying somebody that can't get their stuff together. So I went back to high school at 18, and I graduated when I was 20, and I joined the Army so that I could try to escape that cycle that I had been in for a long time. I was that kid that needed an education, I needed structure, I needed a way to get away from what I grew up in. And the military was a great opportunity, and I found a home for myself. I found other people that were going through similar challenges that I had. And so I was very grateful that I had a young lady in my life that said, you need to do something yourself. And 28 years later, we're still together. So it worked out.
Thanks, Chris. Christy?
Sure. So my dad worked for a defense contractor in HR. Defense contractors are bought and sold very frequently, and my dad being in HR and in the comp side of things was constantly doing comp packages for when they got sold and they were being consolidated. And so job security was a big thing for me growing up. We were always worried about my dad losing his job. He ended up retiring out of HR. He never lost his job throughout all of that time, but it was just really stressful. My dad volunteered for the draft. His brother was drafted, and he's my godfather. And my dad volunteered for the draft, and they didn't take him. His blood pressure was too high. So we grew up being very patriotic in our family, and he had a cousin that flew for Delta that came to visit us when I was in 9th grade, so I was very impressionable. And he had gone to the Air Force Academy and gone through pilot training and was now flying for Delta. And I was like, wow, well, tell me about the Academy. And he's like, well, they pay for your school, and I had my own computer in my room. And I was like, what? And they pay for your school, and you have a guaranteed job when you get out? Like, what? Like, this is amazing. Like, where can I sign up? So every college fair, I kept going to the booths, the Air Force Academy booth, and asking about, like, how do you get into the Academy? What kind of grades do I need? Like, what kind of activities should I be involved in? And finally somebody told me about ROTC. And I was like, so you can go to any college in the country, you can still get your college paid for, you still have a guaranteed job when you get out? Like, what? Like, sign me up. So anyways, I applied for an ROTC scholarship and I went to St. Thomas on a full scholarship. And yeah, I mean, just, I joined for the adventure of it. And most of my time was, I'm from Minnesota, I'm from Lakeville, Minnesota, and most of my time was spent in North Dakota. So I joined the Air Force to see the world, and I got sent to North Dakota. So anyways, that's my story.
That's a hardship tour in the Air Force, by the way. The Middle East, if you're in the Army, it's North Dakota if you're in the Air Force.
Thanks, Christy. You know, for me, it was all about airplanes. I grew up enamored with airplanes. Anytime I heard any noise that came from the sky, I looked up, and it was all about airplanes. So I wanted to fly. You know, also, you know, we were 4 kids. My parents were divorced, and you know, how to pay for college was part of it. So I actually went through a program called Aviation Officer Candidate School. If you know, if you've seen the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, that's how I got my commission. And so I, you know, guaranteed seat in flight school, and I made it through. And it's, I think one interesting fact here is my mother, you know, I went to flight school, I was going to get deployed, flying off aircraft carriers, flying over enemy territory, I could be a POW, and the biggest worry for my mother was that, you know, she was asking me, are you going to get a tattoo? That was the biggest worry. So, you know, it just goes to show where people are. So for me, that was it. I just wanted to fly, and I got a chance to really do that.
Thank you, Jose. I have very distinctive memories of calling my mother, and one was at the Airborne School at Fort Benning, Georgia, after I jumped out of an airplane for the first time, and I couldn't wait to call her and talk to her about that. And the next time was when I rappelled out of a helicopter, and my mom was completely terrified of both of those examples and didn't want to know anything about it until after it was done. But I'm curious if you guys could share some of your experiences, memorable experience from your service that has, you know, significantly impacted your life. And Chris, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so, you know, I joined the Army back in the 90s. And back then, you know, your biggest fear was, do I go to Bosnia or do I get sent to Korea? That was the 2 deployments that we had, and I was lucky I got to do both of those. But I happened to be in Korea in 2001. And I remember walking in at the end of the day, and the TV was on, and it was September 11, 2001, right? And that day for me, sitting on the DMZ in Korea and watching that happen, I knew that those 6 years leading up to that, it was, you know, we got to do Bosnia, we got to do training in the desert or in the jungle, but it became really real, really fast. I remember exactly how it felt to say, oh no, this is really going to happen now. And so for me, I always put chapters in my military career, and that began chapter 2 for me. I knew it was going to happen, and it happened very, very fast. And the rest of my Army career, the next, you know, 16 years after that, was a combination of multiple deployments over and over again, right? And you know, one of the things that is most memorable for me is when I joined the Army, there wasn't anything really going on. It was a Clinton administration, and it was, you know, kind of a good time. We were, you know, having a lot of fun and doing a lot of training. And then I remember the very first troops that I got after the war started. And I remember thinking, looking at these kids, thinking, you raised your hand and you said, I want to serve our country in a completely different environment than I had to do that in. And I remember how much respect I had for those kids. And I know there's folks out here in the audience and folks that are online that was a part of that community. And I just remember how much respect that I had because it was a different decision for them than it was for me. They knew what they were signing up for. I knew it was potentially a risk, but it wasn't real. And, you know, for me, I think the generation of soldiers that came after me and service members that came after me, that day, and to see people raising their hands after that day, was such a huge change for the way I viewed the people that I was serving with every day. I had so much respect for them. So that day for me was a change in my service and a change in the way that I viewed the people I was working with every day.
Chris, how much time did you spend deployed into the region after that day?
A total of 7 years, about 7.5 years.
Yeah, a lot of time. Yeah. Thank you for that, Chris.
So I could maybe add a little bit, because the timelines work. I started aviation officer candidate school in January of 1991, and what else happened in January 1991? We launched Desert Storm. And so of course they were threatening us, hey, we're gonna accelerate your training, you're gonna be in the front lines, in 2 months. It's like, the war didn't last that long, right? But, at the time I was on active duty, the flying was incredible, right? 14 no-fly zone over southern Iraq, combat air patrols, reconnaissance missions. But I have to say, I left active duty in '99 and re-affiliated in 2002, right about the time I joined Medtronic. And in 2011, I got recalled to active duty, and I went to Afghanistan. So here's a Navy guy who's used to flying, got sent to Afghanistan, working for the Army, wearing an Army uniform. I was working for a great Army guy, H.R. McMaster, incredible person, former National Security Advisor. And so I would say that experiences were really impacted me and really changed the course even of my career at Medtronic. I started in the company in finance organization at Medtronic. It's a tremendous organization. And I had been in sales after that. And then I got recalled to active duty. In my mission there, very last minute, I got pulled up to this task force. It was an anti-corruption task force. And so it was more of a diplomatic mission. I was working with the U.S. Embassy, I was working with the international community, and I got a real taste of that. I was like, I wonder what I could do when I got back to Medtronic to do that. And it just so happens Medtronic was starting a program in anti-corruption, compliance with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Enforcing and supporting our businesses outside the U.S. And I remember being in Kuwait on my way back and seeing this posting, because I was like, I need to do something different when I came back, and applying for the position while I was in Kuwait, and then came back a couple of months, took a couple of months off, and so when I came back to work, I went to a new organization, and that's been super rewarding. That's been incredibly rewarding. The last basically 12 years, I've had a focus outside the U.S., and I've got to know so many parts of the company that most of us don't get a chance to see. And so I've really enjoyed it. So to me, that was probably the most impactful. And the time in Afghanistan was, I wouldn't say it was a great time. It was hard work. But it was an enriching time. And I got to be there and got to participate in a lot of the kind of local customs. I got to attend a local wedding, and I spent a lot of time, out with the people, and that was incredible as well. And so that was, to me, that's probably been the most impactful day for me.
Thanks, Jose. What do you guys, Chrissy or Ken, you want to add to that? I can add one if I could. So my first military assignment was at the end of the Cold War, and it was in a field station whose sole mission was to we were monitoring the East. So we were basically an intelligence production facility watching. And I remember vividly the days that came up to and watching when the Russian military basically left Eastern Europe and went home, and the world fundamentally changed in the blink of an eye. It was like over the successive several months, we shut down that facility. The war was that war, which never exploded in violence, was won. And it's, as a service member, that's your dream, that if you show up strong, if you've got the capability to fight, that you never actually have to deploy that. But of course, we're ready for the conflict.
Mine's a little bit more serious. I was a young lieutenant, and I got the opportunity to attend a funeral for one of our soldiers. And, seeing how his family felt when they called out final roll and he didn't respond and his boots were there, it made me take the rest of my experience that included being in northern Iraq for the no-fly zone and commanding in Bosnia, and making sure that every single one of my soldiers came home safe. And that was something I was proud to say happened. But to see a family, it's hard enough to know what's happening with a soldier, but to see what happens to the family when a soldier gets all was the most impactful thing for me.
So I'm going to take this question to Christy. Christy, you and I were part of the sponsorship of the Women's Leadership Forum, and you got a chance to present there, and you saw all these. There were nearly 400 women from the Minnesota National Guard, officers and senior enlisted of all ranks, and to see that kind of transformation. And that spurred for me the question about like how has military service fundamentally transformed our lives and the lives of society. Can you share anything from that perspective, how it's changed for you?
Yeah, that was a really special moment, and thank you for that opportunity, Dave. I was, in 1999, I was the only woman military member on our base. So I checked in, and it was me with a team of men. And I had to prove myself in different ways, but like that, standing in front of the packed Molly auditorium, there was standing room only, and it was women from the National Guard that were in uniform. I mean, they were in their BDUs. I didn't know I didn't know there was a uniform for the day, so I was in my civilian clothes. But there were, women packed in that auditorium that were serving our country. So that was really impactful to see the amount of change that our military has gone through, just in terms of equitable representation. And I also had a classmate of mine in ROTC. She flew the first all-women A-10 crew into a combat zone. She was on 60 Minutes for it. Like, I didn't join the Air Force to do any sort of firsts of anything, but found that we were doing a lot of firsts in our generation. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Ken, do you want to take that?
Yeah, there's a couple experiences that has influenced how I continue to lead today. And the biggest job I've ever had in my life right now, I still think of some of those jobs early on. First Sergeant here will tell you, the better lieutenants realized LT stood for learning thing. And I come out into the military 23 years old, and I really didn't know anything except how to jump out airplanes, rappel out of helicopters, and fly a helicopter. So I really needed to learn from the soldiers and the NCOs under my responsibility. So I was in charge, but they knew how to do everything. So for me, I always want to seek out those people that really know what's going on in our process. And most of you know I'm responsible for OpEx now as well. And the success of our OpEx program is going to be by engaging the people that do the work. And so that was a big impact for me all the way back in the early 90s. Still do that today. The other one was, as I was going down to Bosnia to be a company commander, my unit was pretty small, and half of it had to stay back in Germany, and I got assigned soldiers from 2 other units to augment my company. So I literally met some of these leaders for the first time the week before we deployed. And we weren't cell phones, we were email, but we weren't good at using it. And we were responsible for everything from Hungary, Croatia, and Bosnia, and Serbia. And so having soldiers, NCOs leading multiple platoons at multiple locations, you quickly had to realize the quality of small unit leadership, supervisors, and managers make or break your organization. It's still the same today. I just looked at my OHS results for an organization that's pretty sprawling, but it really shows where we have great leadership and where we have opportunities to do better. And so for me, I put a premium on the first line leader that's supporting the people that I said in my first example that do the work and add the value. So it's still the same today, a million years later.
Thanks, Ken. I wanted to turn the conversation to leadership qualities, and I remember I was 24, turning 25 maybe, and I was asked to step into a role as an executive officer, training to become a company commander. And I just had the good fortune of being placed under 2 of the finest leaders I had ever known. And so one was Mike Farley, who was the company commander who is, and I spoke about him at the extended leadership team meeting, extremely disciplined in how he thought about people, his deep respect for everybody in his organization. And I'd never seen a team where I knew people would die for that guy because they genuinely loved him. One of the strongest attributes of leadership is the ability to engender love for leaders, because you'll sacrifice your life there. The other person was the first sergeant who went on to be a command sergeant major, and he knew I was a lieutenant in training, right? So a leader in training, and pulled me under his wing, and he was the most disciplined, both physically and mentally, and doing what you say you're going to do. He was so good, and his ability to bring the best out of the organization. I saw those two leaders work in concert with one another, and it was very impressive to me. So I think about those leadership qualities all the time, and I'm curious, and maybe Chris, you could take this one first. What do you look for in leadership qualities? What do you think veterans are bringing based on that experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. You and I actually talked a little bit about that this morning, so I've got a lot of examples of that, but I'm not going to put my specialists on the spot down here. But if you think about the core values in leadership for the Army, you have loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, right? You can recite all that, right? And the thing about that is, those aren't just words. It's similar to our values that we have as a company, as Medtronic. The Army has that, and the military each have those things, and we put a lot of focus and attention on that. But me as a very young leader, I thought it was a little bit arbitrary at first that I had to know every detail of every soldier that worked for me. I was waking them up in the barracks in the morning. I was making sure they were shaved. I made sure each month during a counseling session that I checked their finances. I went and checked their POV and made sure that their tires and windshield wipers were good. And it seemed a little bit arbitrary, but what it taught me was that every one of these people that worked for me was an individual. And that if I really wanted to learn how to influence and motivate people, I had to really understand them on an individual basis. And for me, that still stands true today. Folks that I work with, I try to get to know them as well as I can, because the Army's definition of leadership is to be able to motivate, influence others to accomplish a task by providing purpose, direction, and motivation. If you want to learn to influence people and you want to learn to motivate people, you got to know who they are and you got to know what makes them tick. Those things still ring true today. So for me, those things are very, very important, and I carry those with me every single day. So.
That's great, Chris. Can you talk about situational leadership? If everyone's a little different and you're motivating, how do you do that?
Yeah, so one of the things we always say is that motivation and discipline, it isn't a one best way. That everybody is motivated differently. So there's some people that I think they don't want to disappoint their leader. There's some people that might be a little bit afraid of their leader, right? There's different styles of motivation with people. And I think that if you understand that, does this person want to progress in their current role? Do they want to learn something new each day? Do they care about supporting the overall team? If you can just really figure out what people care about every day, those are kernel pieces of information for them. It matters to them. It's the things that are in their heart. And if you can figure out what those things are and you can provide those experiences for them and show that you care about the things that they care about, then you can easily cater your style and your approach to the people that work with you every day. And for me, I try really hard to be able to do that. I don't know that I always get it right, but I try really hard to try to understand people. It's really important to me. So.
Thanks, Chris. Jose?
Yeah. I'm just hearing a lot of things that just resonating. My environment was different. I was in a squadron, and we were not in probably the intense situations that you guys were, but the principles are the same. The collaboration you get, and one thing that I think somebody said here, that the respect, right? You respect the people that work with you and for you, which means you value what they have to contribute. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And the military, in a way, it's just a bit of a class system, right? There's a kind of rank and all that stuff. And in the Navy, there's a big kind of equalizer. And when you cross the equator on a ship, there's a big kind of initiation ceremony they do. It's called crossing the line ceremony, and you get initiated into the Order of Neptune, right? At that point, there's only two types of people. There are those who have crossed the line, they're the trusty shellbacks, and those who have not crossed the line, the slimy pollywogs. That's it. There are no other class of people. Doesn't matter. We had a captain in 06, a colonel that had not crossed the line before, and he crossed the line. He was a slimy pollywog. But let me tell you where I learned a lot of respect from my team. When we crossed the line, and I became a slimy pollywog, and I submitted to the trusty showbacks, regardless of rank, that brought a lot of respect for the rest of the time with the squadron. That bonded us because it showed that, one, I kind of valued our traditions, and two, I respected them enough to submit to what they had to offer. And it was incredible, and I had no regrets about that. It was kind of funny stuff, a little dirty, but it was a lot of fun.
All right, so I'm going to move to the next question for you guys is, do you seek out veterans to serve on your teams? When do you do that? How do you do that? Ken, can I kick this one to you?
So I've been out for over 25 years, and within my first year, I was part of a junior military officer recruitment program that put me in my first job and then sent me back recruiting other military people. Since then, I've probably hired 500 plus military leaders. And I do seek them out. And I think it's an opportunity that we talked about that we could do better in Medtronic. We've had pockets of excellence working with certain recruiters, but we haven't made it a real initiative. And in a world where we know the most diverse team will be the best team and the best team wins, we're missing out on a whole group of diversity of our veterans, because there's not a workforce that's more diverse than the U.S. military today. So I absolutely do. It's something that I'm working on with my HR business partner and our recruiting partner to do much more intentionally. So I think we can do a better job.
Ken, what specifically do you think those veterans are going to bring? The diverse experience, what else do you think they'll bring?
The results orientation and the ability to work with other people. In operations especially, a lot of times we don't have enough resources or time, but we still have to get the job done. And so that focus on results orientation, one of my favorite sayings is effort is appreciated, but results matter. I believe that a veteran brings that effort to make sure they finish the job. And I think that is different than what some candidates bring to work.
Christy, do you want to comment on this?
Well, when I think about most of the jobs, anytime I've switched companies, I always had an interview with somebody else that was a veteran. And I think about the amount of trust that is just implicit there when you're talking to another veteran. It's integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. That's ingrained in us. And so that's really helped to make a connection and open some doors. I think back on, and then in switching to new jobs, and I think veterans are familiar with that, right? You have to move every so often. The base that I was stationed at for most of my time in service, we were looking for incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles being launched over the poles and doing satellite tracking for high priority satellites, which inform troop movements on the ground overseas. And so when you think we were in a steel reinforced concrete above ground building, it's the world's most powerful phased array radar, it still is. And I was on one of my first shifts and we had incoming. We had signals of incoming, and I'd been trained. And in my mind, I thought, we only have so much time before we have to make an assessment of the system. Is it working correctly? Call headquarters and brief a 4-star general on what we're seeing, who then has to pull our other sites, verify from a secondary source, and then they call the president to launch a retaliatory strike. And that's what our job was. And so it's one of my first shifts on duty, and I see signs of incoming. And in my mind, I always thought I'm gonna call my friends and family and tell the people that are closest, just come to the base, because it's like our building was designed to survive a near miss. Well, you don't have time to do that. But in an emergency situation like that, you just go on, I just went on autopilot. And so with that, and ended up obviously not being incoming because we're all still here today, right? Our system was working correctly, and it was an object that was re-entering the atmosphere with a missile-like trajectory. And so to our system, it looked like it was incoming. And then they pulled the other sites. They didn't see heat signature coming from the object, so we were like, nope, it's there's no need to launch anything back. But from that, I learned to trust myself. So I can trust myself when I'm in a situation. I'm not going to freeze up. I'm going to, dwell, or I'm just going to draw on like my resources and my inner strength to bring me through whatever that moment is or whatever that challenge is. So that's what I learned, and that's why I look to hire from the veteran population, but in addition to, it's also a way in, right? If you're interviewing with a fellow veteran, and they're going to ask you about your service. And there's just the implicit trust in the stories that you're telling, that you're being completely honest and you're completely trustworthy to do the job.
Thank you for not launching a retaliatory strike.
Yeah, we're preventing World War III every day out there in North Dakota.
Chris, I got to get your perspective on this, because I sat in your office at Plymouth Nathan Lane, and Jesse Scanlon, who I see out there in the audience with his son, who's in the service or was in the service, and talking about this very topic. What are you looking for in veterans?
Yeah, the beautiful part about being in the military is it doesn't matter what school you go to. If it's basic training, if it's airborne school, airsoft school, master gunner school, sniper school, it doesn't matter. There's an element of leadership that is tied to every piece of training, every single day in the military. And so for me, Christy is spot on, number one. By hiring veterans, you find people that do get the experience and learn to trust themselves in the most austere situations. It's these young kids like Dan over here, he's young and he was making life and death decisions at a very young age, right? So you get that confidence from them, but you also get this development and leadership that happens at every element along the way for their career. And you can't replicate that. We try really hard as an organization to develop our leaders, but it's a part of the culture in the military that every single school you go to, every day, there's some leadership structure to it. So what do I expect from them is people that are ruggedized, that they can lead through very tough situations, but that they can lead, because as Ken always says, leadership matters, right? And we can pull those people that way.
Thank you, Chris. One of the things for those who are not veterans or maybe not directly connected to the military may not know the degree to which the transition from military to civilian life can be very difficult. I will tell you that I myself struggled. I was not in combat, and yet I struggled after 8 years in the service. How do you make that transition to the civilian world? And you go through challenges in order to do that. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. When I joined my first company out of the service, there were 10 of us that were hired in a cohort. And within 2 years, the other 9 had bounced and departed to somewhere else. And it wasn't because the company that they had joined wasn't a great company and wasn't going to be a good place. They were just not able to make that transition. It took a bounce or two in many of those cases for them to find the place and say, the civilian world is different, believe it or not, than the military world. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts, anybody who wants to jump in here on that transition from military to civilian. What could we do better as a community to support veterans?
First of all, I think what Dan and the rest of the group is trying to do here to start up a Veterans Employee Resource Group, I think that's super important, because you feel like you have a place to call home, and I just recall being recalled to active duty, going to Afghanistan, and getting that feeling of, this feels good. It feels like back in the day, because of the camaraderie, and so I think that's important. I was active duty Navy. What do we do? We launch missiles, air to air, drop bombs, take pictures. None of that translates into a civilian world directly, right? But it's these other intangibles that really, and so having people help you kind of transition, like, I did joint work, who cares? Oh, I did, collaborated, did cross-functional work. So somebody that can help translate that experience into what it means to be to be in the civilian world. And I think the important part is we can also do something in terms of like talent acquisition, understanding like, hey, we're not looking for these kind of direct, word for word, I did this and did that. You got to read between the lines, and so I think it's important for us to be able to translate that stuff between the lines. Some of these leadership-like qualities, some of these things that allow us to like say, well, nothing's too insurmountable for us. We can learn and do anything. Nothing is gonna cause us to kind of recoil and go, well, I don't think I can do that. That's not really something that happens. So I think translating our experience that really matters into the civilian world, I think that can be a challenge.
So we talked a little bit in the pre-call about this is one of our employee resource groups. And one of the reasons why I think ERGs are really important for us in Medtronic is we want folks to feel comfortable. We want every single person on our team to have someone that they click with. Because we know, and I think Chris, you mentioned it, other companies that study how people behave will tell you if someone has a friend at work, they're much more likely to flourish and stay there than if they felt like they weren't included, they didn't fit in any way, shape, or form. The military forces folks to have friends through proximity. You take dissimilar people, put them in the proximity of whatever, and they just bond and they learn to get that. I don't see always in our environment people bonding and realizing how much we depend on each other in all of our work. So for our veterans, it's great we have an ERG. It's great to reach out. For other folks that maybe aren't veterans, reach out the same way, be welcoming, be inclusive. Because again, the most diverse and inclusive team is going to be the best team, and the best team is going to win. So how do we make people feel welcome and leverage their talents?
Yeah, for me, I spent 21 years in the Army, and that's a lifetime. And it was, I was a trigger puller, right? I didn't have a super technical job. I was infantry, I was recon, I jumped out of helicopters, I led jungle school. And so the thought of making this transition into this type of environment was, it was a little bit scary, right? But just like we were talking about with adaptive leadership, how people are motivated, everybody's different. And I think that I got lucky because I'm very competitive. And I saw this as an opportunity, and whenever a veteran recruiter reached out to me, I shared with him what I was concerned with, and he's like, no, trust me, you're a leader. I need leaders in this organization. And I think having somebody that could see what my anxieties were, and then to be able to clear it up for me and say, you know what, you can do this. When we were at the Pete Collins Awards ceremony, one of the things that I said was I feel an inherent responsibility to be that voice for other people. I want to be able to tell people, you know what, you can go lead operations in a med device company if you want to. You've got strong leadership skills. We can teach you all the technical stuff. Trust me, you've already shown you can do technical stuff. But the leadership is really hard. So I feel that we owe it, and that I personally owe it, to reach back and pull people along with me. So that's what I always want to do, and I'm always going to try to volunteer to do that. So when I see kids like Jesse's kid and Angel, my quality partner's son, I'm going to talk to those kids and tell them, like, learn everything you can while you're doing this, because we're going to bring you into a company like this and you're going to crush it. So.
This is my third organization since getting out of the Air Force and getting out of the service, and same. So yeah. So in that, I think there's a couple of things. Like when I was in the service, I was on our crisis response element. I was the executive officer on that. So anytime there was an exercise or an emergency on base, I was activated, and so. And leading the response for the base. At every company I've been at since getting out of the service, I've been drawn to these crisis response teams. So like and I was in during Y2K, which turned out to be a non-event, but we were preparing for it, right? And then during 9/11. And so So I know I'm good in a crisis, and I bring this like level of calm. I was really fortunate when I transitioned immediately out of the military. I joined the company, and there were 2 other junior military officers that had recently gotten out of the service, like within the last 1 or 2 years. So they'd already kind of started that transition. But it was somebody that I had 2 best friends at work that, that's what Gal says, you should have a best friend at work. So I had 2 best friends at work that I could just share acronyms with, or just like swap stories with, you know, and we had like our own language, and it was just really helpful onboarding into the civilian sector. But I've just found that like some of the lessons and the things that I learned and did in the service, even though it was early career, but it's followed me through right now.
Just one shout out to veterans here or non-veterans who are here. I think the thing that hasn't been said here is that during that transition period, the focus of veterans, because it's so much on acclimation and adaptation, for me personally, it took me 5 years before I became interested and passionate about looking behind me and understanding, oh, there are other people who are going through the struggles that I did. And when I read Sebastian Junger write about Tribe, if you've ever read his book as a war correspondent, and what happens to people in service, particularly those who've been in combat, the importance of us bringing people in. And so my appeal to you, if you're a veteran or just interested, we need people to get involved in the ERG that are interested in helping people especially during this transition period.
One thing I wanted to add too, that is when you're in the military, you're making life and death decisions all the time, or you're in like life and death situations, and we are at Medtronic too. So I mean, this is dissimilar from the other 2 companies that I was at. Like the decisions that you're making are impacting people's lives. So that's the common thread between military service and Medtronic.
Well said. We got one last question, but before I go there, I want to open it up to anyone here who's in the audience. What's pressing for you? Are there questions that you'd like to ask one or multiple members of the panel?
Come on. There's one online.
All right.
Question online.
Do you see a hand here?
Jose, did you in fact get a tattoo?
The question was, Jose, did you get a tattoo?
I am proud to say that I did not get a tattoo. But I passed away knowing that I did not get a tattoo.
Other questions? Do you have some online?
I have one. What is being done at the executive level to allow highly qualified veterans who are transitioning out of the service to be able to be hired, even if they don't have a 4-year degree?
Do I need to repeat that, Tuan, or did they hear? The question was, what is being done at the executive level to better recruit veterans into the company?
So we've taken a lot of jobs across GOS, which is Global Operations Supply Chain, and other functions, and removed the requirement for degrees. And we believe that opens up more applicants so we can see who's interested. I always tell people, if you're interested in the job, even if you don't think you're qualified, bid on it anyway. Show you're interested, figure out if you're not the person for the job tomorrow or for today, what will it take to be that person tomorrow? So we've done some things as a company, so at an executive level, a company decision to remove requirements from jobs that open doors that wouldn't otherwise be. One of the things I see today in modern recruiting using AI is some resumes won't get past that firewall to even be considered, and that's a shame. I know of at least one plant manager that I've hired in the last 5 years that had to find me on LinkedIn because their resume never made it through the firewall of the recruiting department. So we are looking as much as our recruiting processes for continuous improvement as we are, the continuous improvement we do in our factory floor. But I would say the biggest thing is being openly promoting partnerships with, for example, Recruit Military, which our account manager is a guy by the name of JT Blum that I've worked with since 2002. So I'm excited to have him on board and really step up our recruiting efforts in the military.
Do we have another question? Any other ones out here? Yes.
So on that one, Ken, you were talking about the firewall there for individuals who have friends or family members who are in the military and they are looking to transition to the civilian world. Other than email you, what advice do you have for those individuals?
I absolutely think a referral is powerful. We know that as coworkers, and if you're a high-performing team member and you refer somebody from your network, that gets my attention. It gets Chris's attention. We have a lot of openings in the company, and it's meaningful when we bring in talent that we know and that we can vouch for. So I would say that's the best part. There is also referral bonuses that we pay for people that bring talent, because recruiting can be expensive. The last VP that I hired, I had to go through a retained search agency because my way of doing it on LinkedIn got me a lot of interest, but not a lot of really qualified candidates. When I hired her, that was a huge expenditure for us. I think of that sort of things, and leveraging our referral program is one that I would really encourage. What about you? Any others?
Yeah, and on top of the referral program, I think it's also good to, if you know somebody that is a veteran trying to transition, outside of just referring them, you need to also try to find them someone that they can talk to that's working in the company already that's a veteran. Just like I've done with you, somebody that's trying to transition out of the military, I haven't talked to you, and there's other people in this room that I've done the same thing with. I think it's really important that not only do we use a referral process, but we also align them with somebody that is in a role similar to what they're looking at, that's gone through that transition. That's how we can help. So,
I think any one of us can be that person, and the Veterans Employee Resource Group is a resource for not just people within the company, but outside. Not so many people I've talked to from outside the company that we advocated for when we said, you know what, man, let's push for you, and they've ended up in the company. I didn't know him before, but I know what I'm looking at. You talk to the guy, okay, let's start working on touching up your resume or whatever. But as an employee resource group, we can be that as well.
I love volunteering for the Recruit Military Fair every year. It's once a year, and then if you can promote that on your LinkedIn network too, that will help draw in more veterans. So, yeah.
What I would ask all of you who are online and in the room here is, if you see a resume that's got military experience on it and you don't see the direct connection, we're all too busy, but just take one extra moment to understand it, to try to translate it, ask someone to help you translate that experience, and see why someone whose job is trigger pulling might actually somehow relate to running a factory, right? Perhaps it's Veterans Day, I don't know why this happened, but Friday a young woman that I'd hired 20 years ago reached out to me to thank me for hiring and placing her in a role, and she said, I just wanted to let you know I landed my dream job today. 20 years later, she just wanted to thank me for that. So I'm like, it was just a moment for me, right, to help her get into our company, but she finally found her way in there. Just take that extra moment, and you can actually change someone's life.
Is that why you were crying on Friday?
That's why I was crying, exactly. Yeah, but we can actually have a real impact on real people. So, any other questions from the audience?
What? Come on.
We'll come back here. Oh, please. Sir, I couldn't hear the question. Do we want to go back to the Army again?
I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I got out.
So I went back for my 30th class reunion, and I saw that my roommate, Lieutenant General Chris Donahue, was commanding the 18th Airborne Corps, and I couldn't be prouder to have a guy like him take care of us. But I also think that my role now is every bit, if not more important to the country than when I was a young company commander 25 years ago. So one of the things that we learned when we were going in is we were leaders for the country forever, and I take that serious. So I'll leave it to the young ones.
Thank you for that question. One more comment there.
Well, I'll tell you, there's no way I'm going to go back. But what I tell people is, I feel like there's a piece of me that's still in the Army. I hope that the young soldiers, the young officers, that I had a bit of a hand with helping to develop them, and I get to watch them now. It's like Ken was talking about his friend. I have soldiers that work for me that are command sergeant majors today. I have soldiers that I worked with that are, general officers today, and I got a small piece of, hopefully their development, right? So for me, there's still a little bit of me in the Army right now, for at least another 10 years or so.
I mean, I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. I mean, I had so much responsibility at such a young age, and I just feel so fortunate that I had the experiences that I did. I also didn't want to be moving around with young children, and so I have 4 sons, so I'm ages 13 to 21, and I couldn't have done that in the service. I think it just would have been too hard. So.
I mean, for me, right, it was people, paid money to do what I did in the Navy, right? I got to fly around in the F-14, and it's like, hey, they made movies about that, so it was great. However, it's just, it is dangerous. I have a lot of friends who are no longer with us. It's dangerous just not even in combat, just regular day-to-day accidents around the ship. I had a good friend that I went to flight school with, who was at a test pilot school at the Hudson River and was killed in an accident there. And so my old commanding officer was doing a high-speed flyby, doing a missile simulation on a carrier, and aircraft exploded. So it's dangerous work, and I knew I didn't want to continue to do that. There is a question that came in that I wanted to just share real quick, and I think the essence of the question is, what can be done to kind of educate kind of the broader population, the hiring managers, the people who should be actually considering veterans, because they're bringing in these qualities that we just spend all this time talking about. That's a really good point. And how do we get the word out? We're certainly interested here, and certainly the veterans that aren't here are interested. How do we get the word out to the broader population?
Take that, Chris. I would say encourage everyone to have a relationship with someone who's been in the service, or multiple people in the service. I would say if you want to get to know anybody of any population, have a relationship. Get to know them, learn to see the world through their eyes, see their shoes, and I would say the military is no different than any other part of the population.
Yeah, I would say for me as a leader, the folks that met me at this site when I first came here, when I did my Me in a Minute slide, the first thing you saw is that I was a veteran. I think for us as leaders, it's important that we share our experience and tell people who we are. And my hope is that it makes it a little bit easier for people to approach us with those types of conversations. If it matters to me, then I'm hoping it matters to other people as well. And I also want to make it very clear that I care about veterans. I care about veteran recruitment, and anybody that is going through an experience of trying to recruit someone that's a veteran, I'm always going to be there to have that conversation with them. So I think that leaders show up where it matters, and this is a place where I'm always going to show up. So
I would say there's an opportunity for us in Medtronic to de-emphasize the technical, except for those jobs that absolutely require, say, an engineering degree or specific technical skills. I always look for a technical capability, but I balance that with leadership, runway, and fit. So a lot of subjective things on what does a person bring to our organization. In Medtronic, we often over leverage, well, have they done this exact job for 3 years experience? No, but they've done something that was equally as hard. So how do we have an open mind to people's experience and don't get so wrapped around the axle of med device experience, because quite frankly, I don't want to hire the talent from our competitors. I want our talent to be better than our competitors. So how do we find the best people out there? We need to be open-minded to the military veteran.
I think we'll leave Ken with the last word on that. Thank you all very much, and invite Dan back up here.
Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please.
Go Navy, eat
Before we break, to go back to our busy lives and busy schedules, I do want to leave you with a few words and a call to arms, if you will, a call to action. Today's Veterans Day. Please take a few moments during your day today to take a moment and celebrate, what veterans have done for this country and the value they bring to our organization. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming.
That's good.
You could block.